Nomad of Nowhere Season 1. This is going to be a spoiler review, so if you have not seen it, then go and watch it and then come back here. I'll make a spoiler-free one eventually, but for now, let's begin. The plot, I would say, is relatively unique, primarily because of the weird combination it makes of genres. Combining a western with fantasy and magic is something that you don't see very often, so having a western style of environment where the main protagonist can use magic is quite uncommon to see. Relatively speaking, there's not much the show sets up at first. There is only one magic user, and everyone wants to capture him. And for the first half of the season, that's pretty much how things play out. The Nomad just keeps running into different people who want to capture him for different reasons. Whether it be claiming his bounty or wanting to learn about magic, everyone has their own agenda that requires the Nomad. The pitch at first may or may not grab people's attention, which is unfortunate. One of the best ways to get people to watch a show is from word to mouth, and if the words you say don't appeal to them, then they likely aren't going to watch it. There are many different faces that pop up in this series. Despite what seems like a barren wasteland, the show introduces a lot of memorable names and personalities. I'm primarily only going to be talking about the main ones. First, the Nomad. Getting rid of a character's ability to talk must have been worrisome for the higher-ups at Roosterteeth, because so many of their shows are driven by a character's ability to speak and form a personality through that. But the Nomad and his character goes back and brings out the silent era of storytelling, specifically the slapstick style of Charlie Chaplin. The ability to use movements and expressions to make you care is a hard thing to do. But relatively speaking, that's a bit much on the side of praise on this front, because he's the only character who can't speak. So it's not a true silent production, it just has sprinkles of it. Then there's Scout. I never disliked her, but for the first half of the season, she was a very generic character. She was a sidekick. She didn't really seem to have her own motivation, just anywhere Toth would go, Scout would follow with some wilderness advice. It wasn't until the rift between her and Toth formed that I truly began to enjoy her character. Then she began to form her own motivations, experiences, and she grew from being very one-dimensional. We get to see where she started from introduction to her final decision to side with the one person she was supposed to assist in capturing. We hear them talk about the rumors that have formed around him, and then she comes face to face only to question those rumors. Then we see how Dawn treats her and Toth, and she goes back to wanting to help Toth, until she ultimately realizes what she is doing is wrong. In the manner of one season, Scout has developed so much, and despite her age, which I would assume is fairly young, maybe like a young adult, she's not stupid. In fact, very few characters are stupid for the sake of stupid. Everyone that is of relevance to the main story has a motive for what they are doing and why they do it. Jethro is the only one I would classify as being designed to be stupid, but he's there for comic relief. He's not in every episode, and his time on camera is brief, so it doesn't feel intrusive. Scout is very smart while also a very naive girl. She knows what's right and wrong, and she tries to make sure that she does good. So the way she left off the season was much different than the way she began it.
Such a dunderhead.
Toth. I've said this many times before, and I'll say it again because this is the season review. She was introduced as one of the bad guys wanting to capture the Nomad, but once again, the first half of the season is much different than that of the latter. The first half of the show not only places Scout on her side, but it also has us believe she makes decisions for herself. She's an incredibly strong and determined character, so it's hard to believe anyone has any sort of influence over her. But that's the thing about Toth. What seems like anyone could manipulate her because of her determination to her people. At the end of the season, we saw how she turned on Dawn and thought Elray would be the one who could help her. As an audience member, you can tell that what she is trying to do is good. There's no denying that, it is a good cause. But how she keeps going about it is what flaws her character and makes her turn back on those who actually want to help. Toth to me is a great example of a misguided good guy. Her own beliefs won't allow her to think that anyone without influence could help her and her people. And the fact that her character is being taken into the direction of villainy I not only think is unexpected, but great from a developmental standpoint.
I was wrong to think I didn't need you. I'm sorry.
Then you had the villains of this season, most notably Don Paragon and to a lesser extent Red Manuel. Both of them served as comedic outlets most of the time. Red Manuel, aside from trying to shoot Scout, was a comic relief even until the end. Don, despite being the antagonist of the season, never seemed like a true villain. Both he and Red Manuel had very basic motives, just trying to attain more power. This being the first season, I don't believe Don was designed to act as some sort of real threat. He seemed like a mini-boss that was just meant to serve as the Nomad's entry to trying to stop people like him. So they served their purpose and weren't presented as any real threat. So it seems like the show knew what they were and just decided to try and make them as entertaining as possible as it happened. In terms of El Rey, there's honestly nothing that I can really say about him right now. He's presented as the ultimate antagonist and he had a cool introduction, but aside from that, there's nothing to say presently.
Hey, but... Done? Yeah, do whatever makes him shut up. See? Respect.
The storytelling. The epitome of showing us and not telling us. The writers did an amazing job from so many different angles. First, they were almost forced into having to show us and not tell us because of the Nomad's inability to talk. Right out of the gate, if he's been alive longer than anyone else who could tell the tale, then there is no one to tell the story of what happened. They would be forced to show us. Not that I think showing us a backstory is a last resort option for Roosterteeth, but given its history of backstories, they tend to not happen. So Nomad of Nowhere is really kind of Roosterteeth's first show that is building a definitive chronology. It doesn't leave things up for interpretation, it's just like, here's what happened and here's when they happened. The show very clearly has a story that it wants to tell. It doesn't give off the impression like, say for example, Ruby, where things happen as they happen. The world and lore get built over time because that show isn't designed to end. Nomad of Nowhere right out of the gate seems like it has an ending. It has a purpose and it has a story to tell. And honestly, it's an incredible charm that this series has. Keeping on the topic of storytelling, the writing is some of the best Roosterteeth's currently put out, specifically in the animation department. On top of showing us and not telling, when it does tell us things, it's never in a boring manner. No one is ever gathered to the side and told facts, nor does anyone speak to themselves for the sake of telling the audience anything. Episode 5 is my personal favorite of the entire season. That's not saying that it's the best, but for me personally, it had almost everything I could have asked for in an episode. Questions, answers, theories, explanation, and world building. The episode was described by the writers for a way to give the audience exposition without it feeling like an exposition dump. But in my experience, things only feel like an exposition dump when they are solely being explained through words. And Nomad of Nowhere never did that. All of the Undertaker's lines were delivered as a crazy man's theory about magic. He seemed like he was off the rails every now and then getting something right. But as stated, the episode was designed to inform the audience. So instead of having boring dialogue exchanges, it resulted in experimentation. It felt like he was learning alongside the audience. His crazy theories were meant to implant ideas into the audience to get us thinking and questioning about certain things. This episode is the perfect example of how an exposition dump should be done.
Good question, Clarence. What does make him so special? What does he have inside him the rest of us don't? Perhaps we should find out.
The animation. I should probably stop making this a category because it'll have to be a very serious case where I say that animation is bad, that something aesthetically doesn't look good. Nomad of Nowhere has great animation, but that's not what I wanted to talk about. Toward the beginning of this video, I mentioned how word to mouth is one of the best ways to get people to watch a show, which it is. But another aspect that convinces people is the animation. I'll be honest, when the show was being teased and all there was the Nomad's Wanted poster and concept for the show, what we got was not nearly what I had envisioned it to be. Upon just seeing the Wanted poster and hearing the description, I thought it was going to be another anime. With the success Ruby had and Genlock also being talked about, I thought RT was making a Western anime similar to Cowboy Bebop and Trigun. So, when I had put these thoughts into my own head, when the show was finally teased, I borderline lost interest. The animation wasn't what I was expecting, it looked nothing like the Wanted poster, the sound effects was a style of comedy that I've never been a fan of, and I almost didn't watch the show. What it delivered at face value, I wasn't interested in, and it didn't seem like my style of comedy or show. But upon its release, you see how well it's written, thought out, and delivered. So from my perspective, I'm sure many other people did the same. Instead of watching it, they never gave it a chance because it didn't seem like it offered much. So if you have any friends who are Rooster Teeth fans and watches their shows and they said that Nomad of Nowhere didn't seem like it appealed to them, please convince them to watch it because it is much more than meets the eye. All season, I questioned the type of genre this series belonged in. Comedy is a huge part of it, but I found myself being deeply invested into the characters and their future and where they may go. That type of caring and investment is something that isn't found in straight comedies. Take for example Camp Camp. That show is a comedy through and through. It's a sitcom. At the end of the day, the characters are incapable of growing because they're not supposed to. Max will always revert to being cynical, Neil a nerd, Nikki an outdoorsy girl, and David an optimist. Episodes here and there can divert the characters and play around not being their stereotype, but they'll always have to return to the same person they were when the show began. And so Camp Camp focuses on getting laughs out of you, but Nomad of Nowhere focuses equally as much on drama. The show is a dramedy, a mix between comedy and drama. It's a very Charlie Chaplin-esque series. I'd compare it to his 1921 movie The Kid, which was also a dramedy. The level of slapstick humor was ever prevalent, as is the case with Charlie Chaplin, but it manages to make you care about these two, not because of the laughs the movie had, but because it built up a real bond between characters, and that's what Nomad of Nowhere does. The Nomad is the Charlie Chaplin of this universe with his wacky stunts and emotive expressions, but because it's a dramedy, it allows the show to explore themes like poverty and oppression without it feeling like a heavy weight on the audience. You can very easily imagine this type of show without its comedy aspect and have it be a very serious drama. Then the hardships put upon by Dawn would be much more grim. You'd see how hard it is to truly survive in a world without easily accessible water. Death would be a constant mood, but because it's a comedy, it keeps the show light while dealing with darker tones. Getting a laugh out of the audience isn't a hard thing to do, and it isn't going to make many care about a character who just tells jokes. But forming an emotional connection to the characters is something that is hard to break. You can laugh at the show, but what truly makes Nomad of Nowhere stand out above others is the ability to form an emotional connection to viewers through its actions instead of its words.